1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The U.S. fleet was crippled. 10 hours later, across the Pacific, they attacked the Philippines, clearing the way for an overwhelming invasion of the islands. U.S. forces, including 10,000 Americans and 60,000 Filipinos, pull back to the Bataan Peninsula. After 4 months of fighting without supplies, starving American and Filipino troops surrender to the Japanese Imperial Army. Unequipped to house or feed 70,000 prisoners of war, the Japanese take the weakened soldiers on a brutal 60-mile forced march. Men who fall out of line are bayoneted or shot. 15,000 perish on what would become known as the Bataan Death March. The surviving POWs are herded into various camps.
The Pacific Theater of War is known for some of the most important major battles during World War II. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had done devastating damage to the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Almost all the battleships were either damaged or out of action. Battleships were the command ships of any naval strike force, meaning the capabilities of the U.S. Pacific Fleet were severely crippled after Pearl Harbor. However, the type of warfare would have to be very different from Europe. Japan's empire stretched over a vast area of Pacific islands, so victory would require a strategy called island hopping. Island hopping was a strategy where the United States Navy would heavily bombard islands, followed by a landing of U.S. Marines. Once the Marines had rooted out the Japanese defenses and captured the island from the ground, U.S. forces would then move on to another island closer to Japan, using each island as a stepping stone, until they could eventually stage an all-out invasion of Japan and bring an end to the war. Perhaps no other battle in the Pacific Theater was as important as the Battle of Midway in 1942. In June of 1942, U.S. forces were patrolling the Pacific in search of the Japanese carrier fleet, with the help of the Navajo Code Talkers, that were a group of Navajo tribesmen employed by the Marines to use their ancient Navajo language to confuse the Japanese with code. The United States task forces decoded Japanese messages and pinpointed the exact location of the Japanese carriers. U.S. forces launched a surprise attack on the Japanese carrier fleet. Caught completely off guard, the Japanese carriers and their surrounding task forces were easy targets for U.S. torpedo planes and bombers. By the battle's end, the Japanese had lost 4 carriers, 1 destroyer, and 250 planes total. The Allied victory at Midway is a turning point in the war in the Pacific. The Japanese Navy had lost all 4 aircraft carriers that fought in the battle, and their aircraft carrier fleet was crippled. This allowed the United States to gain air dominance in the war in the Pacific, which allowed them to begin the strategy of island hopping, with air supremacy overhead. If the United States had actually lost Midway, it's quite possible the Japanese would have gained both air supremacy and naval supremacy in the Pacific, putting the United States at a severe disadvantage and a position where they possibly could lose the war. After their significant naval victory at Midway, the United States forces in the Pacific began a major offensive against Japan. Overcoming the severe damage caused to the United States Pacific Fleet at the attack at Pearl Harbor, the United States has successfully employed the strategy of island hopping to draw its forces closer to the island of Japan. By 1945, United States forces had taken nearly every island stronghold held by Japan. The time had come to prepare for the invasion of the island of Japan. But with the real possibility of massive casualties, estimated to be 1 million American soldiers, the United States would consider another means by which to end the war. With prospects of huge American losses, Truman turned to the alternative, the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project was a top-secret nuclear program that only a few people knew about. In fact, Truman only found out about the Manhattan Project once FDR died and he was made president. Robert Oppenheimer and other project leaders worked to make the atomic bomb ready for the United States by summer 1945. When it was ready, President Truman convened a group of advisors to debate using it. They decided that the lives and damage caused by the atomic bomb would still be less than that caused to the United States forces by an invasion of Japan, meaning dropping the atomic bomb would actually save lives because the number of American casualties would far outweigh the number of Japanese casualties on the ground. Ultimately, President Truman decides to drop the bomb on a Japanese city without warning. The city that would be chosen would be an industrial city and not heavily populated. This would act as a demonstration of the potential of American weaponry to further convince the Japanese into surrender. The United States obviously could have bombed a city like Tokyo and killed millions, but that wasn't the intention. The intention was to get the Japanese to surrender. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber plane named the Enola Gay drops the atomic bomb named Little Boy on Hiroshima, Japan. 70,000 instantly die, and 35,000 Japanese are injured. Everything within a 1-mile radius of the bomb was instantly destroyed. Everything within 4.5 miles was instantly set on fire. The area was leveled and saturated with radioactive particles, meaning it was dangerous to live in.
While the world stood in awe of what had happened in Hiroshima, Japan still didn't surrender unconditionally. Truman authorized the use of a second atomic bomb. On August 9th of 1945, just 3 days following the attack in Hiroshima, the atomic bomb Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. Over 40,000 died immediately. Thousands more were maimed or died of radiation in the years to follow. The radius of destruction was 1 mile, and the city was leveled and contaminated.
And finally, on August 15, 1945, unable to let his subjects suffer anymore, Emperor Hirohito tearfully addressed his nation and officially announced the unconditional surrender of Japan. Americans celebrate the day as VJ Day, or Victory Over Japan Day. American boys in the Pacific were finally coming home. The official surrender is signed aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945, and the Allied powers are victorious.
There it is, the news you've been